This panel is really going to talk about if you are a product person yourself, how you need to be positioning yourself to differentiate yourself, not to just get any job, but get the right job. And that if you are a leader looking to scale an organization and trying to figure out how you're going to create your organization, because there's different stages of organization at different scale and different structures, and it evolves as you grow. And with our high growth companies, that can happen within a 2-year or 3-year time period. So you have to hire the right people. So Ken Surdan is the CPO at one of Insight's largest portfolio companies in terms of growth, Diligent. Diligent is the market leader. What we needed was someone who could take something that was the largest in its space and teach an organization how to get net retention up. And for those people who are product in the organization, that means sell add-ons. And when you have the biggest product in the organization and it doesn't actually sell add-ons, you need a product person that's going to drive an organization to sell add-ons. And this is Ken. Mercedes is a recruiter that we use a lot in our portfolio, and I specifically use her for a lot of our product roles. And we've been working together ever since, filling a lot of the C-level roles at Insight. And last but not least, I met Selena a couple of weeks ago at a product conference. There we go. So that's the panel that's up here, and what I'm going to do is kind of go to questions. I'm going to go to Mercedes first. Mercedes, when you're working with CEOs specifically, because you hire most C-level roles, what is the biggest stumbling block when they say, I want to hire a product person? And what are the kind of education and other things do you have to kind of talk to them about when they're thinking about hiring a product person?
If a CEO comes out of product, usually they come out of engineering and have taken on product as an aside, it's a different conversation. But often you'll have a CEO who is a sales and marketing person, and they will really not even understand what the role of product is within the organization. And they'll say, I have engineering, I have project managers, I have salespeople. What the hell does a product person do? I don't understand that. And so that's one of the big pushbacks. And I have a client who talks about it being an Oreo cookie, and that's a way that he was described product in the beginning, and that was, it's all the soft, squishy stuff that goes between sales and marketing, but without it, you have nothing but 2 brown pieces of crust. So that's one of the pushbacks I get, and generally what I start to talk to them about is specific people who have been game changing. So if I think back about product roles that we filled, little company called Palo Alto Networks, when Nir Zook was running it. He's a Israeli engineer, brilliant engineer, best engineer on the planet in security, I think, or one of the best. But he hated customers. He absolutely hated customers. He'd sit down in front of customers. I'm not exaggerating. Like, he'd sit down in front of customers. They went through 3 CEOs before we got Mark. And he'd sit down in front of customers and say, well, that's because you're stupid. And so we hired Lee Klarich out of Juniper, and he's still there. And so we talk a bit about that. But that's the big pushback, is they just don't understand what product is. So you have to educate them on what product is beyond individual product managers or product line managers.
Selena, Selena is actually not from an Insight company, which we wanted to kind of, get a broader range. Talk about when you're scaling an organization and you're trying to hire a product person, not a senior product person, but kind of a director level or below, or any of the other kind of things as you're scaling. What kind of decisions do you have to make, or what kind of profiles do you have to change as the organization is growing?
Yeah. It might be helpful to talk about this in the context of, like, as opposed to when you're in early stage. So like what is it that changes with growth? One, I think, actually I'll start with something that I think stays the same. I'm going to steal Marty Kagan's phrasing on this. You're still looking for missionaries, not mercenaries. Like, you're still looking for people who are going to bring heart to the work that they're doing. So that part stays the same, and that's about where it ends. You stop looking for generalists, you start looking for people who specialize. You stop looking for people who are crazy enough to believe in this dream that you had and decided that you think you can make a business out of it, and who may not have a lot of experience, but they have the heart, they have the belief, they have the faith, and enough smarts to kind of figure out those early steps. You're really moving into a space now where, like, you need people who have done this before, who, like, this is not their first rodeo. You're also starting to think about like your team starts to look a little bit 3D, right? I think like early on, you're sort of like, I need somebody to get this done. Again, I need them to have that like chutzpah, like I need them to really believe in the mission. And then I don't, like part of the reason I'm hiring them is because I don't know what I need them to do. I just need them to figure it out, right? But as you move into growth, like you're starting to identify a lot more clearly what exactly needs to get done. And it becomes important to change the trial to error and trial to success ratios as you scale, which means you need to start bringing people in who are not just like smart and can figure it out, but who have figured out some of it and have done some of it before already and are coming in with not necessarily a playbook that's going to work great for them on day one and forever, right? But are coming with like, you know, more than one tool in their toolbox that they're going to be able to reach for, right? The team is also starting to look a little bit like more 3D, right? Because now you're sort of deciding like, well, what are the different experiences that I'm looking for? How are they going to balance each other out, right? Like, who do I need to? You're starting to think about reporting structures and who can learn from who and who can lead who. And like, it really, you're starting to basically like ask a lot more questions as you're defining what the scope of the role will be and your expectations of that role. And then, if we had more time, like one thing I could go into is the details of these, like, well, what sort of skill sets are we talking about here, and how might you vet for those, and yada yada. I'm not going to do that, but I will call out something that recently I've started thinking about a little bit differently, and I think it has been valuable, which is this dreaded idea of culture fit. Fuzziest notion ever. Like, doesn't like the product person in you just like, oh. Cringe, right? Like, what is the success metric of we've hired somebody who's a culture fit, and how on earth can I gauge that before we've actually hired them, right? One thing that has actually been helpful for me is to think not about culture fit, which has a little bit of that taste of like, I'm looking for people who are easy for me to work with and get along with, right? But to look for culture add, right? Same way that you look at your team and you say, what skills are missing on my team, and how can I round out a team with stronger analytical thinker, somebody who has experience like setting up user research and turning it from a happenstance to a recurring, regular, disciplined activity. You can also look at where you need culture adds, right? Are you accidentally sort of like hiring clones of each other and possibly clones of yourselves, right? And if you are, you really have to sort of face that and identify what people of what backgrounds and experiences, whether professional or personal, could actually enrich your team, broaden your perspective, and help you make smarter decisions.
So Ken, you've had to come in and basically turn the organization around. Talk about that a little bit. Talk about how you've found people, what you've had to look at specifically, and how that was different from other stages that you've had to work in.
Yeah, so it's a big, broad conversation. We could probably take a couple days or maybe write a book around some of this stuff. So I actually think that at scale, what you're trying to do is figure out what are your values around product, and then how do you figure out how to execute those in both microcosms of that horizontally, but also build a vertical capability that creates alignment and a culture that says, like, this is what we care about and this is what's important and why. I talk a lot about kind of the alignment, some of the stuff Melissa talked about, which is if you don't have a shared why, it's really hard to get scale, because you can't distribute decision making when there isn't a common understanding of why we're here. So for me, some of the building blocks of that are alignment on customer first. You know, if you have a product organization that is made up of order takers, and by order takers, some of the cultural things that we were talking about, like, oh, is it a sales-driven organization? Is it this driven? Is that driven? Product organizations that use words like, oh, I've got everything you asked for on my backlog, and I've done a really good job of prioritizing your ideas, and like, do you approve? Like, that's not product leadership. It doesn't scale. If you sit there and have people, a little litmus test for me, if you have people that say, well, the business decided that we were going to do X, like, throw up now, fire them, coach them, do whatever, but if product isn't the business, what the hell is? So I actually like making a distinction between like the commercial part of a business, maybe, like that's okay, like sales and marketing has a go-to-market strategies, which is still fundamentally different than building a product, but the product is the business in many cases. It's what the customer pays for. It's the core value proposition of why that relationship even exists. But if you as a leader have not aligned on the why, you haven't aligned on the customer, if you haven't guided the organization to have a macro core value proposition and then figured out how to extend that down to allow local execution across all of those teams, like you're just screwed. You're just screwed. And you're going to work harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and wonder why something isn't happening. I have 27 development teams, 27 Scrum teams. Okay? I can't possibly know the details of every single one of their backlogs. Okay? But I can hold product reviews that very quickly tell me whether I have somebody who's customer-centric, that understands value, that's tight with their customer, and I describe it as an author-edit ratio. Melissa will be embarrassed, but like there's very few people in the world that can write a book. Very few people can write a novel that anybody really gives a shit about, okay? There's very few people that know enough about a subject to actually start with a blank piece of paper and say, I can share something, okay? There's about 1 million people that can edit those people and tell them how to fix their grammar or where it's a run-on sentence or any of that. In product, I use it as an example of, like, if you're spending 75% of your time changing a product manager's plan and thinking that it's wrong, and you're walking away feeling proud because you're still connected, and I'm still hands-on, and, like, I'm Steve Jobs. I pick the screws in the desk at the Apple store. Like, I personally think that that's an anomaly, a huge anomaly. So I actually think that scaling an organization means that you have to do a lot of the stuff that Melissa talked about, but ultimately you have to believe in building your organization and aligning that to value, and then being able to put in the management processes that you need to be an editor, a very effective, sometimes a very incredibly important editor, okay, that makes that better than it ever could have been on its own. But it's not because you wrote half of the freaking backlog, right? That isn't there. And if you are, it probably means you've failed. You picked the wrong person. You didn't help them align to what was important. You haven't helped them stand up to whoever their internal stakeholders are. Like, there's something wrong, and it's on you. So the good news is that you can scale. Organizations do it all the time. The bad news is many scale poorly and ineffectively. And most of it's going to be about whether you choose to scale, whether you choose to make that transition from being a fantastic individual contributor or middle manager or lower level executive to actually figuring out how to build a scalable organization that is executing with excellence all the time, even when you weren't there to change the grammar on that user story. Right? So again, we could talk forever, but those are some of the things that jump out for me around, like, building your team is still the single most important thing we do, and it all starts with figuring out how to do that at scale.
It does. Thank you. Just one last kind of speed round, if you will. This is one question. You can go then to Mercedes. In your own hiring of people, the director level down, what is like one of the funniest things that you heard through a candidate who thought they were director level and maybe weren't?
So it's a little bit stereotypical, but I have this really stupid softball question for product people that I always say, tell me the product that you're most proud of, and why. It's a stupid little simple question, right? Like, and it's amazing the range you get, but you'd be shocked at how many people talk to me about how complex the project was, the number of constituencies that were there, how hard they had to work to get everybody doing something, and they never mention the customer. They don't talk about why the product was great. They don't talk about an outcome. We grew sales 42%. So many of them, they sound like project managers. And beware the person who masquerades as a product person, who's really the person somewhere along the way that thought they were the cream in the cookie, but really they were just the taskmaster cream of the cookie, which can be incredibly valuable. but it's not a product person. It's not somebody who conceives of value when presented with a customer problem and finds a way to solve that problem and iterate relentlessly until they get the outcome they want.
You know, for me, I'll just take a generic thing. The generic death nail is when they start talking about the complexity of the product organization as opposed to the beauty and the simplicity of the product. If you talk to, I'd rather answer it in a positive way, like one of my favorite product people of all time, Kevin Wheel, talks about how beautifully simple Instagram was when he was there. He's now doing blockchain at Facebook, so God frickin' knows what he's going to do there. But it's these really long questions, the answers that go on forever and ever, and I start to fade out and wonder what the hell they're talking about. Because if you can't convince me in 5 minutes that you can build beautiful product and tell me what that beautiful product is, you're not a product manager. I mean, and you have to be able to convince the layperson that it's beautiful product.
So the one I see most commonly as well is sort of the project manager who thought that they were a product manager. And those can get a little tough, honestly, just because they really believe it. Yeah, they genuinely do.
Melissa, that's one for you. Are you a project manager? If you say yes to all these questions, no, you're not. There you go.
Yeah, no. Or it gets worse if you have like an internal candidate, right? And then they're like, what's between me and the next level? And you're like, fundamentals. Career change, exactly. But for closure, I'll actually share a funny one. So in this situation, I was actually hiring a designer, and he had a beautiful portfolio. And the sort of the blurbs in the portfolio that described like sort of the problem they set out to solve, like who was the target customer, engaging the team in this sort of interactive, cross-functional like brainstorming process, getting to the solutions. Like it kind of like ticked a lot of those like early boxes that I was like, I want to talk to this person. And the interview was over in like 15 minutes because I started with the like your past couple of jobs, like why'd you join, why'd you leave, like let me understand the initial motivation. And for every single company, and it'd been a little bit, I wasn't sure about his background was like he was in like a lot of media companies. I was hiring for a company that was like knee deep in subscription commerce, right? So like kind of a different world. Beautiful portfolio though. Let's see what's there. And the last few companies he named, the pinnacle being MTV, he kept saying, "How could you not? I mean, how cool is that?" I politely wrapped the conversation.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.